Welcome to Starspeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. This is astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to Starspeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is November 15, 2023. Our show tonight is filled with interesting information, basically in four parts. First, we'll take a look at the current astrological impacts affecting everyone, especially the 5 weekend Wallops in a row. I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. After that, then we'll take a look at the week ahead for the period November 15 through 22, the year 2023, and all the waxing moon opportunities that come during that time. Third, we'll go deeper to looking at the astrological factors that pertain to a part of the fight for UFO truth, particularly as he worked out in a story involving Virgoan Edgar Mitchell, Cancerian Stephen Greer, and Piscean Admiral Tom Wilson. We'll end up with a look at U.S. Representative Tim Burchett and his current role in UFO disclosure, undergirded by his Virgo sun plus Mercury conjunct Pluto and an accented planet Uranus in his personal astrology. So let's get started. The context of energies that we're working in right now is really something to take into consideration. By the time we reach the end of November, we shall have experienced 5 weekends in a row of extraordinary astrological activations involving primarily the tension between the signs Taurus and Scorpio, but secondarily the combination of the two signs Sagittarius and Pisces. And the change there makes a difference. All the way from late October through late November this year, there's this astrological pattern in place, emphasizing the difference and tension between the signs Taurus and Scorpio. This all started on October 28-29, the weekend of October 28-29, which included a lunar eclipse, which is, of course, a full moon configuration with the sun in Scorpio and the moon in Taurus. So that same dramatic dynamic was again emphasized right there in the full moon of that period. At the same time, Mercury and Mars were conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, precisely opposing Jupiter in Taurus. It's hard to imagine a more potent configuration to delineate the differences between those two signs and the tension and the pull between them. You know, Taurus wants serenity, stability, predictability, comfort. And Scorpio is on the other side of the story, looking at the deeper factors that may be operating psychologically and emotionally. But that story went on. Then the weekend of November 4 and 5, Mercury in Scorpio opposed Uranus in Taurus. At the same time, Saturn made a direct station, much intensifying that whole arrangement. The following weekend, November 11, 12, 13, Mars opposed Uranus. And then the very next day, the new moon occurred in that same Mars-Uranus axis, again bringing tremendous focus to the interrelationship between Taurus and Scorpio and what they signify. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Here comes another weekend, November 17 through 19, in which this same story works its way out a little differently, this time with the Sun in Scorpio precisely conjunct Mars in Scorpio at the 25th degree of Scorpio. So as you can see, there has been a consistent emphasis on this whole dynamic, mostly the opposition between Taurus and Scorpio, and secondarily just on Scorpio itself. All during this period, it's inevitable that there would have been sensed within each person and the collective of humanity deep emotional or psychological discomfort, as there's a pulling and tugging in two different directions. Taurus wants to hold on to what is secure, known, and familiar. Scorpio wants to relinquish what is unnecessary or perhaps hampering forward progress. Throughout this passage that I've described for you, this tremendous tension worked on everyone individually and collectively, creating this dichotomy between an attempt to hold on in Taurus and the knowledge that it's important to let go in Scorpio. And so that was a bit of a furious battle. Deep emotional discomfort could have arisen easily over themes such as finance in Taurus or sexuality and romance in Scorpio. And that was really the story, the deep story, the under the surface action that was going on throughout that entire period. Now, as time unfolds and late November arrives, that story begins to fade and a different story comes to the front as Mars moves into Sagittarius and squares Saturn in Pisces in the period November 24, 25, 26, with the full moon right behind it, with the Sun in Sagittarius and the moon in Gemini. So the story changes right there to an attempt to deal with conflicting intellectual paradigms and not so much this deep underlying subsurface psychological, financial, sexual, and romantic tension that we had in the picture as long as the Taurus-Scorpio process was underway. And it was a process, a very necessary process, a process of discovery about self and the right direction for self. Key to that discovery process was the period November 11, 12, 13, when transiting Mars opposed transiting Uranus, and everybody felt it. Even though it was disruptive, it also had the potential to point the direction for greater creative fulfillment and personal self-actualization, and those are important things. So as we move into late November, this narrative that we're all experiencing is going to shift, that's for sure, and we'll get some relief as a result of that. And we'll move away from the angst, the anxiety, the inner unsettledness that we've experienced for several weekends in a row into a different level of challenge. We may still feel somewhat edgy, restless, and be dealing with inclinations to break free of inhibitions, blocks, and impediments into higher levels of creativity, authenticity, and success. Yes, we may still be dealing with that, but it will be on a different framework. You could say the universe is goading and prodding us along to our higher potential, and on the way pointing out some of our foibles, the foibles that we would have learned about from late October through late November as the Taurus-Scorpio opposition was working on us. Be in the area of anger management. With Mars in the picture and the oppositions to Uranus, the temptation to fly off the handle, to wax into rage, to throw a fit, and to be ruled by animosity and antipathy towards others was very strong. That temptation was very strong. And we've learned a lot about self and others as we pass through that. We see what's destructive and what is more constructive. So there was learning in that passage. As time unfolds here, the emphasis is going to move over to the energies of the planet Saturn, as I'll describe in just a moment. And Saturn is not in any way like Mars and Uranus and their tendency to overreact. Instead, it's much more self-discipline. Let's look at the week ahead for November 15 through 22, the year 2023. That whole period of time is conditioned by the phase in the lunar cycle where we are, which is the waxing moon. And that means that all of nature is working with us to surge and forward and to move ahead and to put our plans into action and move ahead towards our goals and objectives. That's what the waxing moon is all about. If there's something that you want to grow or have more of or increase in your life or enlarge in some way, the waxing moon is the time to pursue that. And we have that energy condition in place all the way through the 22nd of November and actually a few days beyond that. But as far as the week ahead goes, it's all the waxing moon. And there's some wonderful opportunity periods that will arise during that time frame. For example, November 16 through 18, Mars at 25 Scorpio will trine Neptune at 25 Pisces, and the Sun will do the same thing. That's going to engender an atmosphere of relaxation, peace, and understanding, and allow us an opportunity to think clearly and focus on our higher natures. Now, that's a little bit changed or perhaps a little complicated by the fact that the Sun does make a conjunction to Mars at 25 Scorpio during that same period of time. That can provide a lot of power, motivation, drive, and physical energy. But it's also a little invitation to that same business that we saw for the past month, the tendency to overreact, to quickly jump to conclusions, and perhaps to throw accusations and insults around in the fit of agitation. So we want to be aware for that and try to tone that down a little bit. But basically, November 16 through 18 presents us with a period of opportunity, of understanding, and the ability to reach out to other people and be understood in what it is we wish to communicate with them. So that's all good. Then there's another productive period upcoming, November 20 through 21, when the Sun at 28 Scorpio makes a transiting sextile to Pluto at 28 Capricorn, and Mars does the same. Again, these are energies that will affect everybody, no matter what individual charts may say. We all get the benefit or the challenge of the general transits. And that's what I'm telling you about right now, the general transits. And the general transits, November 20 through 21, offer us some definite opportunities to get on the right track, to use our energies constructively, to make a positive difference where we are, and to see some of our objectives and goals brought into manifestation. Won't that be nice? Yes, it will. It always requires the understanding and cooperation of other people, and that's what's likely to be available, November 20 through 21. Now, on November 22, the Sun, as it does every year around this time, moves out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius, doing so at 8:03 a.m. Central Standard Time on November 22. Adjust that time if you're in a different time zone, please. So when that happens, it will bring to a conclusion the period of the Sun's passage through the emotionally intense sign of Scorpio, where it has been, where it shall have been since October 23. So we'll notice that shift, and we'll move from a 30-day period of an experience with the depths of the psyche to a 30-day period in which we're more concerned with the nature of the intellect. That's the Sagittarius zone. More concerned with intellectual paradigms and approaches to truth or belief systems. Of course, these are fundamental facts of life that underlie human psychology, but it's a little bit different, and you'll see the shift. Looking a little bit farther out beyond the next week ahead, I can tell you that the emphasis shifts away from the Taurus-Scorpio drama to the Sagittarius-Pisces challenge, when the Sun squares Saturn November 22 through 23, which is the Thanksgiving period here in the United States, and then Mars squares Saturn November 24 through 25, and November 26 through 27, Mercury squares Neptune. The commonality here is that Saturn and Neptune are both in the water sign of Pisces. The Sun, Mars, and Mercury will all be in the fire sign of Sagittarius. So this is going to be a shift from the Taurus-Scorpio dance that we've done for the last month or so, and it will move into a different dance, the Sagittarius-Pisces, which I think you'll find is not as fraught with potential to unsettle the very foundations of someone's sense of security. Yes, we might have some interesting discussions or even philosophical debates under the Pisces-Sagittarius combination, but it won't be quite to the level of existential threat that we've experienced with the Taurus-Scorpio conflict over the last month or so. Yes, in the later days of November, there's going to be an emphasis on the planet Saturn by these transits. And as we see that influence start to come in, the themes of life that we're dealing with are going to shift and change in the direction of the Saturn archetype. Saturn is really the antidote to the impatience, irritability, short temper, and extreme reactions associated with out of control Mars and Uranus energies. And we've had some out of control Mars and Uranus energies running around on our planet in the last month or so, wouldn't you say? Well, now comes an emphasis on the wise old hermit of Saturn, who is seasoned and matured by years of experience and has the perspective necessary to impart to the young and the young at heart and the irate and the agitated a little bit of a different perspective. Because Saturn is the archetype, astrologically, of duty, responsibility, structure, organization, self-control, self-discipline, and self-restraint. The concerns of Saturn operate on a long timeline, whereas the concerns of Mars and Uranus operate on a very short timeline, wanting it all right now, immediately, without any process or due process or consideration or patience involved. Mars and Uranus are both hasty, impulsive, rash, and quick to anger when they're out of control. But Saturn is much the opposite. And as the squares to Saturn that I just described come into play, it's going to emphasize the energies of Saturn, cooling down the dialogue in geopolitical situations, cooling down the rhetoric, slowing down the situation, reminding everybody that decorum, self-control, diplomacy, and abiding by the rules of human discourse really do matter and contribute to the situation a positive note. Now, when Saturn gets out of hand, it can also manifest as certain issues, slow progress, seemingly no progress, a sense of stasis. And these may be some of the challenges that we'll see and sense, experience, and deal with as the later period of November unfolds. What are we required to do with the Saturn energy? Pace ourselves, take it slowly, do one thing at a time well, get organized, and create structure. Yeah, structure. That's the key word here. Saturn will be emphasized in late November, asking us to do that. But lo and behold, it's Saturn placed in the sign of Pisces right now, which is where it has been since March 7, 2023, and where it will be through mid-February 2026. It's a period of about 2.5 years when all the retrogrades are figured in, with Saturn in a different sign temporarily. But that's an average period of time for Saturn to move through a sign. So we have Saturn in Pisces from early spring of 2023 through late winter of 2026. Looks like almost 3 years. But it's not, because Saturn will be in the next sign briefly inside of that period. So about 2.5 years, but that's long enough. And every time Saturn moves through a sign of the zodiac, it brings us lessons, because Saturn is the planet of wisdom and maturation and good judgment. And it teaches us something about the sign where it's positioned. That's true in your own natal chart as well. Your own natal chart gives you an idea of what some of the lessons are that you're working on in the present incarnation. But the general transits, such as Saturn's position in Pisces, gives a hint as to what lesson everybody on the planet is experiencing right now. So Saturn in Pisces, the lessons have to do with the sign of Pisces, which is a mutable water sign. The strong suit of Pisces is its capacity to adapt, to mold, to shift, and to alter itself in order to accommodate others and their points of view. And that's a good thing. So we're all learning lessons about that now. But its weak suit is in the area of structure and organization. Mutable water, that's Pisces. It's a mutable water sign. Mutable means given to change, alteration, fluctuation. And one of the most troubling characteristics of Pisces, when there is one, is the tendency to wander, meander, lose a sense of direction, get lost, get off track, get distracted, waste time, end up at the wrong place. So as Saturn's energies become emphasized in late November, so also will the lessons and messages of Saturn in Pisces become more emphasized. It will be up to each of us to extract the good from the sign of Pisces with its capacity for empathy and ability to adapt when that is necessary. And it will be up to all of us to individually be wary of the pitfalls of the mutable water situation. So it can be very easy with Saturn in Pisces, and we've all already experienced this, to take our eyes off the central prize that we're working for, whatever it happens to be in our individual existences, and to just follow something down the rabbit hole that's interesting or perhaps diverting or entertaining or makes us forget about the actual challenges that we're dealing with. Escapism, yes. Escapism is one of the potential pitfalls that can come from an emphasis on the mutable sign of Pisces. So it's going to be up to each of us to take the Saturn virtues of structure and clarity seriously, cultivate them and live by them so that we can use this time productively. This means we've got to be clear about what our goals are and how we're using our time. These will be the issues that will come to the forefront in later November when the Sun and Mars and Mercury in Sagittarius make 90-degree arcs to the planets now in the sign of Pisces. We're coming up to a break right now, so please come back after the break and I will talk to you about astrological factors and the fight for UFO truth. You're listening to Starspeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Welcome back, star friends. This is astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to Starspeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is November 15, 2023, and we're going to talk some now about UFO truth and the disclosure movement that supports that objective. You could raise the question, why is this such an important matter? And I'll tell you why I think it is. It's because if we're being visited by our neighbors in the solar system or in the galaxy, or perhaps from other galaxies, we ought to know that because it represents the next step ahead in human evolution. It represents the step in consciousness where we move away from the paradigm that has been foisted upon humanity for centuries, that life exists alone on this planet and nowhere else, that intelligence exists alone on this planet and nowhere else, and that humanity is the apex of evolution. Common sense, intuition, and spiritual discernment all concur that can't be so. The universe is much too big and infinity exists. Why there should be any limitation to one teensy point of space within it, there is no justification. So this is an important step in the evolution of human consciousness that is being placed before us. That humanity should be denied the opportunity to make that step is a tragedy and a violation of human rights. So when you look at it from that angle, the topic of UFOs, what they look like, where they manifest, how they've been cited, and the management of information about it by governments and corporations becomes not just an oddity that is of interest to some nerd science types that live over here on the edges of humanity and, like to dig around in government documents and consider alternate theories of propulsion and what have you. No, it's not some peripheral concern. It's a central concern because it represents the next step ahead in the evolution of humanity. So it really is a central concern, meaning right at the middle of what we should all be thinking about and seeking to understand. Some people see the issue as a a distraction from other more important matters like inflation, immigration, geopolitical tensions, national debt, climate change, and many other issues. I don't think that's the case. Each one of those issues has its relevance and its time and its place, and we do need to deal with all the challenges which are before humanity, including economic disparity and homelessness. But the truth is that everything we've manifested here on this earth comes out of the minds and hearts of humanity. Perhaps if we can straighten up the minds and the hearts of humanity, these problems will solve themselves. How can we straighten up the minds and the hearts of humanity? Well, by opening our consciousnesses to the fact of infinity, the enormity of the manifested universes, and our small place within it, and get a right-sized sense of self-importance. Not an oversized sense of it, a right-sized sense of it, so that we belong in the system of which we are a part. And there's no dishonor in being a part of that system. It does not demean the relevance or the value of human life. So why has this story not been told openly to the public about the crafts that have been captured and held now for 70 and 80 years, the unusual disc-shaped and other such items that have been captured and held by organizations on this planet? Why? Well, according to ufologist Dr. Stephen Greer, the year 1956 was the point at which intensive secrecy around UFOs and anti-gravity research and technology came into place. The year 1956. That year was noticeable astrologically, for Saturn at 27 degrees Scorpio, the sign of secrecy and concealment, made a precise 90-degree arc to Pluto, also concerned with the same things, at 27 degrees of Leo. So there was a Saturn-Pluto square that year. Such configurations don't happen every year. It's an important point in the Saturn-Pluto cycle, Saturn square Pluto, and it happened in 1956, with Saturn at 27 Scorpio and Pluto at 27 Leo. That arrangement emphasized the planet Pluto, which at that time was in the sign of Leo. Now, as a matter of fact, Pluto was in Leo the whole time that nuclear technology leading to nuclear weaponry was undergoing development. Pluto was in Leo in 1945 with the first detonation of nuclear bombs. Now, this is important astrologically because Pluto, at our current time in 2023, is just about to enter the opposite sign where it was way back when nuclear power got started and UFO secrecy also got started. Whenever a major planet like Pluto opposes its own place at a past time, it's going to dredge up all the issues associated with that past time when Pluto was in that opposite sign. Just for a little example of what I'm talking about, we can look back at the months of April and May 2023, when Pluto was temporarily in the sign of Aquarius. That's April and May 2023, just a few months ago. Now, when Pluto was in Aquarius, it started to change the paradigm. And right after that occurred the June 5 publication of an article which changed the UFO game entirely. It came out on the Debrief news site, and of course I'm referring to the blockbuster article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal revealing the whistleblowing claims of David Grush. So Pluto remained in Aquarius for a few days into June as that was occurring. But that paradigm shift in the consciousness of humanity had already occurred because Pluto had been in Aquarius a little while. At the same time, behind the scenes in Congress, the process had started and the wheels started turning towards what would become the July 26th historic hearing in the House of Representatives when David Grush and Commander David Fravor and Ryan Graves testified before a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee about the reality of the United States government programs that deal with UFOs, crashed UFOs, materials, and bodies. That all came about right after Pluto had been in Aquarius for a total of about 3 months there, from late March through early June 2023, and certainly throughout the entire months of April and May of 2023. So that was a little preview for all of us as to what Pluto and Aquarius can do. Now, Aquarius is a very important sign for us in terms of the next step ahead for humanity's evolution. And here's another little example about what Aquarius can do. It's a sign that is symbolized by the water bearer. The water bearer is sort of an altruistic figure who totes his water jug to the source and then brings it back to others and pours it out that others might drink of the waters of life, of the waters of revelation, of truth, and of understanding freely without any constraints. It's a sign that deals with circulation and sharing. Back in the late 90s, the sign Aquarius was emphasized because both Jupiter and Uranus were in Aquarius. As a matter of fact, Jupiter and Uranus made a conjunction at the 6th degree of Aquarius in February of 1997. February 1997. So I want to take you back in history to the late 90s with that influence. 1997, February of 1997, the sign of Aquarius was intensively emphasized and activated in the consciousness of humanity because of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in that sign. Jupiter and Uranus stayed in the sign of Aquarius for quite some time. Jupiter about a year there, Uranus about 7 years. But it didn't take very long for this Jupiter-Uranus blast of Aquarian energy breaking through to a new paradigm to bear fruit. In April of 1997, there was an historic occurrence of central importance to UFO history. That's when astronaut Edgar Mitchell and ufologist Stephen Greer made a visit to the Pentagon and talked to Admiral Tom Wilson. That was April of 1997, according to Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer. Of course, this meeting has been disputed as to whether it really occurred or not. But Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer say that it did, and it was April of 1997. And they say that what they talked about with Admiral Tom Wilson was the hidden and special access programs over which he was given dominion and did not know it. So let's take a look at the people involved astrologically. Edgar Mitchell, of course, is a famous personage that everybody knows about. He was born on September 17, 1930, at 4:30 in the morning in the location of Hereford, Texas. And so we can have an astrological birth chart for him, and I'm going to share that with you in a moment. Edgar Mitchell was a United States Navy aviator, test pilot, aeronautical engineer, and NASA astronaut. After that career, he became a leading ufologist or advocate of UFO awareness and the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and in that role, he was a researcher in the nature of consciousness. Edgar Mitchell, born September 17, 1930, was a sun sign Virgo, with his sun located at 24 degrees of Virgo. The moon at the time of his birth was 14 degrees of Cancer. Mars stood close by at 12 degrees of Cancer, and so Jupiter as well at 16 degrees of Cancer. That grouping of celestial factors in the chart of Edgar Mitchell was square or 90 degrees, approximately 90 degrees distant from the planet Uranus at the time of his birth, which was located astrologically at 14 degrees of Aries in retrograde motion. So what this means is that Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, the leader in consciousness, and the advocate for UFO truth, had a very emphasized planet Uranus in his personal astrology by virtue of having the moon square Uranus, Mars square Uranus, and Jupiter square Uranus. The squares tend to draw out, emphasize, or amplify the power of the planets involved. And in this case, it all points to the planet Uranus. The same situation occurs in the astrology of Stephen Greer. The planet Uranus is emphasized in his personal astrology as well. He was born in a completely different period of time on June 28, 1955, but by the time he was born, Mars was at 22 degrees of Cancer and Uranus at 27 degrees of Cancer, separated by only about 5 degrees of zodiacal longitude, and that is close enough to be considered a merging or conjunction. Also, Neptune was involved with position at 25 degrees of Libra, creating a Mars-Uranus conjunction and a Uranus-Neptune square in the personal astrology of Stephen Greer. So any way you cut it, Uranus is emphasized in his personal astrology. So there went the two Uranians up to the Pentagon to challenge the authority of the Saturnians in government. Now, the field of ufology is littered with people whose personal astrologies emphasize the planet Uranus. Here are a few. We'll start off with George Adamski, who was one of the first writers in the field of ufology. He was born April 17, 1891, with the sun at 28 degrees Aries, opposite Uranus at 29 Libra. Then there was J. Allen Hynek, leading ufologist, whose Saturn was positioned at 28 Aries and Uranus at 25 Capricorn. Saturn square Uranus, born on May 1, 1910. Jacques Vallée, born September 24, 1939, also has an emphasized Uranus in his chart, with Uranus at 22 Taurus and the lunar south node at 29 Taurus, separated by 7 degrees of zodiacal longitude, but still close enough to be considered in effect. Linda Moulton Howe, born January 20th, 1942, as Saturn at 22 degrees Taurus, conjunct Uranus at 26 degrees Taurus. So she's also got Uranus emphasized in her personal astrology. Richard Dolan is in the same situation with Mars at 25 of Taurus, square Uranus at 28 degrees of Leo. He was born on July 1, 1962. Uranus is emphasized in his personal astrology. A great UFO historian, Richard Dolan. And then there's Stephen Greer, too, already mentioned. So you can see that the field of ufology is populated with people whose personal astrologies emphasize the planet Uranus. Well, Uranian Edgar Mitchell and Uranian Stephen Greer had found a friend in Admiral Thomas R. Wilson because he too has an emphasized Uranus in his personal astrology. He was born on March 4, 1946, with the sun at 14 of Pisces in a 90-degree arc to Uranus at 13 Gemini. And it would be Admiral Thomas Wilson who would be so critical to this discussion that was had at the Pentagon in the late 1990s, in April of 1997 to be exact. For when he was told of these special access programs by Mitchell and Greer, he began his own internal process of asking questions, which led to an external process of asking questions. And in time, he found out that the very things that he was supposed to be in control of were being hidden from him. The programs that he should know about, the budgets that he should know about, the processes and the activities of different branches of the government and the military that he was in charge of, he was being kept from knowing about. That fact was then discovered and discussed much later in the year 2002 during a conversation between Admiral Thomas Wilson and yet another actor in UFO history, Dr. Eric Davis. You know, there's been a film made about that discussion. It's called The Memo. It's a short film, 15 minutes only, belonging in the genre of the short, but it brings to life the tensions built into that moment in October of 2002 when the Piscean Admiral Thomas Wilson allowed himself the freedom and the liberty to tell someone the truth that he knew, which was that the United States government was suppressing, hiding, cloaking, and camouflaging information of vital importance to the world and the American people. This particular conversation constituted a leak of sensitive government information. UFO historian Richard Dolan has said that that revelation of information, which went into a document called the Wilson-Davis Memo, is the single most important divulgence of UFO history and information in all of UFO history. So this is a situation that we should all know about. And I've given you some astrological insights into how it all evolved. Remember, the initial conversation between Edgar Mitchell, Stephen Greer, and Admiral Thomas Wilson occurred in the late 1990s under the influence of Jupiter and Uranus in Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign that deals with the free flow of information. It's very different in its dynamic than, say, the sign of Capricorn, which is all about rules, regulations, protocols, decorum, lines of authority, pecking order, and general close to the chest management of information. Aquarius operates very differently. It's an air sign, whereas Capricorn is an earth sign. Earth signs tend to contain and control, and that's what they're good for. Aquarius, as an air sign, does what air signs do, which is to let ideas, concepts, and information move around, circulate, ride on the airwaves, be emanated through and disseminated through electronic forms of communication. The sign of Aquarius is connected to the future, to innovative technology, and to the notion of cosmic fellowship. So Aquarius was very influential in the late 1990s when Greer and Mitchell and Admiral Tom Wilson had their discussion. Aquarius is going to become very much emphasized again here quite shortly with Pluto's movement into that sign in late January 2024. Pluto will be in Aquarius for about 7 months. Then it will retrograde to Capricorn for about 4 months. And then by early 2025, Pluto will be in Aquarius to stay for 18 years, creating a very powerful emphasis upon the sign of Aquarius, far stronger than that which was generated by the passage of Uranus through that sign in the 90s, which only lasted about 7 years. So it'll be twice that strong. Something big is in the offing. Well, right now, who's carrying the torch in that direction is United States Representative Tim Burchett and his associates. But let's take a look through the window of astrology at Representative Tim Burchett, who has shown up on numerous podcasts to advocate UFO disclosure. Of course, that's exactly what he did in the July 26th hearing as well in Congress. Ever since that time, he has been promoting the entire discussion and indicating his lack of fear or trepidation about what anyone thinks, because he has a preference for letting the American people know the full truth. Tim Burchett was born August 25, 1964. He is therefore a sun sign Virgo, with his sun positioned at 3 degrees of Virgo. What's interesting about Tim Burchett is that his Mercury, Uranus, and Pluto are all kind of clustered together, with Mercury at 16 degrees of Virgo, retrograde motion, wouldn't you know it? He has Mercury retrograde, so he thinks a little bit differently from everybody around him, and he has his own sort of southern drawl that he communicates with that also distinguish him and his communication style. But Mercury is at 16 degrees of Virgo in the personal astrology of Representative Tim Burchett. At the time of his birth, the planet Uranus stood at 10 degrees of Virgo and the planet Pluto at 14 degrees of Virgo. So Uranus, Pluto, and Mercury are all clustered together in his personal astrology in a small area of the zodiac, the mid portion of Virgo, creating a merging of those archetypes and meanings, Mercury, Uranus, and Pluto. So you heard it here. Yep, Tim Burchett is another Uranian. He's also a Plutonian, and Pluto is the god of the underworld and concerns excavation, getting down to the depths, getting to the bottom of things. It has its mythological roots in the Greek god Hades, who was literally the regent and ruler of the underworld, to which the souls of the dead departed after life and stayed there for a while in their catharsis process preparatory to reincarnation. Pluto gets its archetypal nature from Hades. So Pluto is also the god of the underworld and is very much concerned with underground places and the excavation necessary to get to them. In other words, digging down to the bottom or the foundation, or burrowing in order to find out what's at the bottom of the well, so to speak. Tim Burchett, with his Mercury at 16 Virgo and his Pluto at 14 Virgo, is very much involved with that process of excavating or digging down or uncovering or getting to the bottom of an issue. Tenacity is also one of the characteristics of the Pluto archetype. And for anyone who has watched Tim Burchett, either in the House hearings or his subsequent numerous appearances on podcasts and news shows, will be fully aware of that tenacity, which he demonstrates very clearly. So Tim Burchett is the one to watch now as he carries this torch of truth in the UFO field forward, using his twin abilities of digging for the truth with the Mercury-Pluto conjunction and his capacity to think outside of the box with his Mercury-Uranus conjunction. It's going to be an interesting ride. And remember, there's astrology behind all of things we see unfolding in the world around us. Thank you so much for listening in to Starspeak. This is astrologer Maureen Richmond signing off for the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network.